It's time. Flo's here with the international newspapers. A lot of focus on Ukraine. We've had, of course, the stories coming out of Ukraine today. Violent clashes with police, leaving several demonstrators dead.
That's right. Let's take a look at some front pages, starting with the Wall Street Journal. It talks about how these protests in Ukraine have turned deadly, and you can see a photo there of that unrest. And you can see a similar photo on the front page of the International New York Times today, another photo of those violent clashes between the protesters and the police there. Now, in its editorial, the New York Times is pointing out that this standoff has really gotten to a new level with these first fatalities. And now that blood has been shed, there's a real risk that these clashes will spread beyond Kiev and make a peaceful solution less viable. And the New York Times really calls on the West to make it clear to President Viktor Yanukovych that he will pay a price if he orders a bloody crackdown. The Independent is also focusing on this Battle of Kiev in its editorial today. And it says that it's actually up to Yanukovych to lead the way out of this situation, to lead to a desperately needed political situation, because after all, he is the democratically elected president, even though, according to the Independent, he is starting to appear more and more authoritarian, rushing in these laws that clamp down on basic freedom. So this editorial is quite alarming. It says that Ukraine is really on the brink of a catastrophe. It points out, though, that Yanukovych still has time to avert a disaster, but he has to act fast.
Well, the other big news story at the moment, of course, is the Syrian peace talks in Switzerland. Not much optimism in the international papers.
No, the international papers are pretty pessimistic about these talks. Let's take a look at the Independent, which talks about the war on words, which is beginning at these talks. It points out that these Geneva II peace talks, as they're being called, opened with bitter exchanges from both sides. L'Orient Le Jour, the Lebanese paper, also talks about the war on words and this complete disagreement about the fate of Bashar al-Assad. And L'Orient Le Jour, which is usually seen as being an anti-Assad paper, talks about the arrogance of the Syrian regime. So you can see here that a lot of the papers aren't that hopeful this will lead to an agreement. The Daily Beast says that even though a lot of people are saying that the fact that this conference is even taking place is an achievement, all signs point to the fact that this will be an epic failure. So it really doesn't hold back on its words there. It says that despite being badly bloodied on the battlefield, the Syrian protagonists are still far from ready to reach a political solution. And The Guardian, let's take a look at a cartoon in The Guardian, which seems to suggest the same thing, where you can see all the international protagonists there up to their knees in blood while they passively look at Bashar al-Assad and a rebel there fighting in the blood over Syria. So all this to reach common ground, says The Guardian, but doesn't bode very well.
Now, going to go stateside. A possible retrial 70 years after a death sentence.
That's right. You can read about it in The Independent. It's quite an incredible story. This is George Stinney. He was only 14 years old. You can see a photo of him here when an all-white jury in South Carolina sentenced him to death for the murder of two white girls. This was in 1944. This jury reached their verdict after just 10 minutes. Now, this black teenager is the youngest person to have been executed in the U.S. since the 19th century. He was so small that he had to sit on a Bible so that he could actually fit into the electric chair, and his feet were dangling above the floor, according to this article. Now, 70 years on, his family still insists that he was innocent and the victim of a miscarriage of justice, basically a scapegoat. They say they have new evidence and have asked a local judge for a retrial to clear his name. They want to right a wrong 70 years later, although some people say that actually this is just going to open a bunch of old wounds.
Horrific story, so let's lighten the mood, shall we? Flo's pulled out a couple of articles about boats.
That's right. Sticking to The Independent, first of all, there's an investigation about just what happened to that boat that got stuck in the Antarctic right around Christmas time, that story that grabbed headlines around the world. Now, a lot of questions are being raised about what happened. Why did that boat get stuck? Well, first of all, there are a lot of complaints that scientific mission was actually dominated by fee-paying holiday makers. And on top of that, there are concerns about the behavior of the scientists who perhaps led tourists and all sorts of journalists onto the ice and didn't obey the captain when he told them to come back onto the ice. It seems, according to this article, there was a lot of confusion around that time. So The Independent calls this the ultimate tourist trap. And talking about another ship, this time the Titanic. Perhaps you've heard of it, Stuart.
Just about. There was a film, wasn't there?
There was a film, yeah. That was a famous film. But it was based on a true story.
Oh, okay.
Now, this is an article in Le Parisien aujourd'hui en France, which talks about one of the mysteries about the Titanic. There was a woman who claimed to be a survivor. Her name was Lorraine Allison. Now, she was 2 years old when the ship sank, and she was presumed dead. But in 1940, a woman named Helen Lorraine Kramer appeared on a television program claiming she was actually Lorraine Allison. She claimed that she had been rescued, taken to England, brought up by this other family, etc. But this article points out that according to a DNA test, she was lying, and this proved that it was a hoax. But her granddaughter is still saying that her grandmother was really on the Titanic. So despite the DNA test, the controversy is still far from over.
And I am Elvis Presley. Yeah, thank you very much, Flo. Flo Vilmano, keeping you up to date and bringing you the international newspapers on France 24. Coming up for you next, all the latest, of course, on the Syria peace conference, plus Ukraine. And do you remember Toronto's mayor, ridiculed at the end of last year for his screaming video rant, followed by revelations about drug and alcohol abuse? But he is planning to run again. And he continues to have mass support. We find out why in Focus in the next half hour.